Okay. Let me, all right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. There's still few people joining. And so I will introduce myself. My name is Dawn Beaver, and I'm the new program coordinator for MACAE. We're so happy to have you here, and hopefully you're learning lots of good things today. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. All of these resources will be available on the MACAE website. You can get updates and information there. And we also do a monthly membership check-in. So if that's something you're interested in, please let Patrick or myself know. One thing we want to remind you of is today at 2:30, if you're available, we would love for you to log on, and we have a conversation with Latoya Newsome, who is the new director of the National Office of Career and Technical Education, or OCTE. And we are really excited and grateful for the opportunity for her to speak to Michigan. So the more people on board and showing their support, we'd be greatly appreciated. So that's at 2:30 today. And I know Patrick sent the link out. We're going to be recording all of our sessions today and tomorrow, and those will be available in addition to the presenters' materials. All of those will be made available to you. Be sure to check your email for your sketch validation form if you need sketches, and make sure you complete that at the end of the institute and submit it by Friday, May 19th. We encourage you to keep your cameras on so that we can get some of those nonverbal reactions to the presentation. I will have everyone muted so we don't get interrupted by background noises. So having said that, today we are lucky enough to have two people doing our presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Hullstrand, and then she will introduce her coworker. So thank you all, and I'm turning it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Dawn. And I know you were cutting out there for me, and I think Debbie could as well. So for the other attendees, so you might want to put some of the stuff that you mentioned in. Oh, okay, got it. So let me backtrack. Hopefully you can hear me now. Can you? Okay. So thank you to Dawn for being our moderator. Dawn, I know you were cutting in and out when you were talking to the attendees, so I'm not sure if you want to put some of what you said in the chat for everybody. Thank you to the MACAE organizers for reaching out and asking for the math-specific GED session. We appreciate being part of today's virtual conference, and are here to answer for Debbie to deliver the math session and to answer your questions. So my name is Melissa Hullstrand. I'm the Michigan State Relationship Manager. That just means that I'm the point person for all things Michigan to answer questions, assist with issues. And I'm also one of our leaders in our service to corrections across the US. I was able to snatch my colleague, Debi Faucette, who is amazing, to deliver this math session. Debbie is one of our directors. She does a phenomenal job at organizing, planning, delivering our professional development Tuesdays for Teachers webinar series, as well as many other professional development topics and webinars and live in session trainings as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Debbie, and I will mute myself. Debbie, you're on mute.
Hi. Great way to start. Great intro, Melissa. Let me mess up on the first part of the conversation. So I am Debbie Faucette, and I want to thank you all for inviting us to share some time with you today and deliver and talk with you about math. Another kind of technical thing, if for some reason I start to sound like I'm breaking up, Melissa just let me know. And at that point, we might lessen the bandwidth by all of us going off camera, because sometimes even that little bit of bandwidth can mess up even the other stuff. So just let us know. I can't tell. The other thing, um, Dawn and Melissa will be monitoring any questions that you put in the chat, because I will not be watching it while I'm presenting. But every now and then I do take a breath between slides. And when I do that, we will give Dawn and Melissa a chance to let me know if there's a comment that I need to address immediately. Our sessions are always very informal. I think it's so important that you get your questions answered when you have them, because you're not going to keep listening to me while you try to remember your question if I save it for the end. So just want you to know how we present. Melissa told you a little bit about herself. I will tell you a little bit about me. I've been around so long that I believe there's been enough of a transition that I may be a new, known, unknown entity to many of you. But I have been in adult education for over 30 years, which even I can't believe I say a number like that. But for my home, I'm coming to you from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is my home state. Never been anywhere else, thank goodness. I was able to retire from state service in the Louisiana Department of Education and ultimately the community and college technical system, as state director for many years for both GED testing and adult ed. And for the last 12 years, I've had the pleasure of working with GED testing service, because the real pleasure is I get to do things I truly love, and that's working with teachers so that we can do the best we can do to help our students. Because before I did this job, I was that classroom teacher, and I was a local director, and then I was a state administrator. And I appreciate the fact that the job I do nationally, professional development, keeps me in touch with teachers and students, because we can see what our efforts are doing. So today we will talk about math. I think that's what you all wanted to know about. And one of the things I like to tell everybody is you too can teach anything you need to get your students ready for the math test. We know nationally that only about 6% of our adult educators actually have a background in math. And I am a perfect example of that. You know, back in the dark ages when I was a first-time teacher, I was your basic PE teacher, social studies, geography, all of those world history things, And but as an adult educator, I, like many other adult educators, had to teach every content area. And so that's why I think it's, especially in math, people get so darn scared of approaching math. And yes, we have to up our game a little bit to do it, but we certainly have the ability to do it. So today, we're going to talk about what information we know about the mathematical reasoning test. And that's from research that our test assessment experts and our test developers have shared with us. From the information they've shared with us, we're going to dive into the skills gaps that they have identified from recent research and test takers across the country. Once we know where our students are having the most difficulty, then we can start to hone our skills in on the different strategies and the approaches to help teach those skills differently or with new precepts. There's more than one way to approach every type of problem. Then if we're going to talk to you about those strategies, we need to also look at some of the resources that are out there, both on our website and just out there on the web that you don't have time to go digging around looking for because you're busy teaching. And then most of all, answer your questions. And I explained how we would be answering those questions. So here's what we do know about the mathematical reasoning test. We know that it does, we know the basic components. I mean, you all know that. And if you're not real familiar with what should we be looking at, I'm going to tell you where to find it. We also know the testing outcomes of our students. We know that through GED analytics. And we have now from our test assessment and test development people, the research that really hones in on what are they having the most difficulty with. So if we know those three things, let me talk to you about how I know those three things. I know what is going to be on the mathematical reasoning test because I reminded myself that in the assessment guide for educators, in the back in Appendix C, and I'll call it the AGE, but I always forget, the assessment guide for educators. That is a document that we prepared in 2012, 2013, when we were getting everybody ready to take the new test. What you see on this page, I cut a snippet out of each of the 4 categories that we lump all of the things that we test on the mathematical reasoning test into these categories. And I am going to close this because I can't always see everyone. So what do I need to teach about the whole conundrum of math? Well, I can tell you 25% of it is going to be on quantitative problem solving with rational numbers. Now, I have the first 2 things listed there, but if you go to Appendix C, you'll see approximately 20 or so different performance level indicators. But I just wanted you to see, a little bit out of each reporting category, hopefully to pique your interest to, hey, let me go to the website, look up the assessment guide for educators, open up the math session, refresh yourself on what we're going to have on this test. And you can see the rest of the reporting categories. I know you don't need me to read it to you, but for your students, sometimes it's helpful to know, 25% of this test is going to be a lot of computing, fractions, decimals, 1/4 of the test, stuff you've been working on since you were in the 3rd and 4th grade. Another 20% is going to be on problem solving in those computational skills. You're talking about finding the area or perimeter of shapes. Again, that's not a foreign concept to your students. Now they know, okay, 20% there. 55% of this test requires them to be able to do some algebraic problem solving and reasoning. And that's the difference in the test. We always had algebra. I've been around. I was just getting into adult ed as they were ending the 1978 series test. I just came on board in the transition. I've been around for the 1988 test, then the 2002 test, and I was working for the testing service with the 2014 test. But this snippet will pique your interest to go to Appendix C in the in the assessment guide for educators and really hone in on, okay, this is what's on the test. We have more than one way of sharing with you what's on the test, and I'm going to talk about that. Does everybody know what those strange little abbreviations are over there? A Q1A, a Q1B? Probably not. And our consultants sometimes would throw them up, and I'm going, please explain what that is. When they created this test and the test frames and so forth, every performance indicator that was going to be tested was categorized. The Q is quantitative. The A is algebraic. In other words, we can decode every one of those. Doesn't make a dime's bit of difference to you or the students, but anytime I look at something on a screen that I don't understand, it bothers me. So I wanted to explain it to you. Here's what else we know about how students are doing on the test. This is national information, and I'm going to stop my video. So there. This is national information, and I wanted you to see, okay, the 2022 data, that's from January to December of 2022. We could look at the national passing average in reasoning through language arts, math, science, and social studies, okay? Then I looked at the 2021 data. I put that in parentheses, and I just wanted you to show, I really only put, if there was a pretty good variation, I put them in parentheses. I wanted you to see what the actual numbers were across the board there in the pass rate on the national passing average. Now, in 2021, why did we have a much higher pass rate in 2021, average passing standard, than, I'm sorry, in 2021 than we had in 2022? What kind of testing were we doing for the most part in 2021? We were doing at-home online testing, and the only people who were able to take the test at that time were the students who had scored green on their GED ready. So of course we should have had a higher passing average during that time. We get back into 2022, centers were opening up, we fell more into the normal range when you look at a combined online test, at-home test taker and in-person test taker. So I don't want you to think anything happened that was wrong in moving from 2021 to 2022. We certainly know, if you know they're in the green area, we know that about our test takers in 2021. We had a hodgepodge of people showing up to take the test in 2022. So we were getting more back into our normal numbers, right? Then these other statistics, I wanted you to see that pretty much in 21 and 22, the overall averages did not vary. I only put the number in there if it varied more than 1 or 2 points. And you see the only place where the passing average varied, where it was just really, really close, was in math. And I added that. The other numbers were pretty static. So what that tells us is, and the reason I wanted to approach this particular session, if we keep doing what we're doing, we keep getting what we're getting. So we're not seeing a lot of change in maybe the passing average on test scores, especially the overall passing average going up, because we keep doing what we're doing. We're going to keep getting what we're getting. So today we are going to talk about why students are having trouble with certain things and what is it we could do maybe a little differently so we could get, we'll do something different. Maybe we'll get some higher overall averages. So that's our lead-in information on these things. So our focus today, what we know, we've got test takers, there's gaps in their knowledge and that they need to succeed on the test. What we figured out in talking with our research team is it can only be a couple of things, and you all could probably answer this question too. They're either students, some people learn faster than others. You can introduce something one time and there's 3 or 4 that get it on the first go. Then there are others that need to see it over and over and over before the light bulb goes off. Obviously, we know that's one of the problems. So they maybe need more coverage of a certain skill and more practice in the skill. And that's what we're going to focus on today, looking at some of that. I would hope that many of you have either seen or heard about our discussion on skills gaps. But, the skills gap, when our test assessment content experts came to us, their definition is, hey, we thought students were going to perform well on these items, but yikes, they are not doing well. Their actual performance is not matching where we expected their performance to be. Now, when I say their actual performance, I am not saying that they assumed even the students scoring 145 to 164 were going to blow the top out of every question on the test. No, because we have a range of skills from foundational to more complex, because we are measuring 3 different passing performance levels. So there is an understanding that certain students scoring in a certain range are going to miss more questions than those scoring in the higher range. That's a given. But what we're finding is some of these students on these foundational skills were really not performing where they expected them to perform. We've already said this, and if you are, I don't care what subject you teach, every one of us as adult educators and any type of teacher knows that our students all need to improve their critical thinking, their writing and or their reading skills. It's all about the reading skills, yet some of us in different domains don't think reading is our job, okay? when I have you all in a room and we can eyeball each other one to one, my favorite thing when I'm doing, especially a math session, is I say, every one of us agrees if they have better reading and writing skills, they're going to do better on all the parts of the test. You know, we know that's going to happen. And okay, whose job in this room is it to teach reading? And most people kind of just sit back in their chairs. And I'll say, okay, look to the person to your left, look to the person to your right. Do you think they're teaching reading? Because if they're not, they're thinking you're teaching it and you're not. Somewhere we have to remember that reading has to be a part of whatever we're doing, whether it's math, science, social studies, or RLA. Because if we can embed some improved reading and writing into their math, they're going to do better. It's a given, some students are going to do less well on some items because the concepts are more difficult when you're moving to college and career ready, and college and career ready plus credit. So when we presented this, or when our test content expert in math presented this, he really broke down the challenges he was seeing into there was so much information, we had to do it in 2 sessions in our Tuesdays for Teachers. And you can still go back and find those sessions and all the resources on our website. And I'll show you how later. But we divided it into 2 sessions because the session 1 was what they were probably most surprised about, that people were having difficulty in even the calculator prohibited test items. That's the first 5 or so items on the test, and they are purely computational, okay? And they're having trouble with that. Also, exponents and roots, again, in the purely computational format, but they have to know it in the computational so they can embed it in what they need to know about algebraic reasoning. And even in geometry, in the 3-dimensional shapes. We spent time on that. I will not spend quite as much time today in what we covered in session 2, algebraic computation and inequalities, but that's also an area that we've got to focus in on. I am not going to talk to you much at all about slope and graphing, even though, of course, they're having trouble with that, or what Michael explained to us as multiple correct answers. If you want to ask any questions about them, I think I can address them. But we've got so much in just some of the basics that I think if we can hone in on that, we'll get them over the finish line. This is probably a good place, Melissa, to ask if you see any comments or questions.
Yes, Debbie. So just a few. Well, first of all, when you mentioned growing up in Louisiana, Teresa said that she grew up in Zachary. So and then Jennifer.
Teresa, I'm right here in Central, and I went to Baker High School, so we're closer than you think.
I just want to say really quickly, my parents live in Denham Springs, and my nephew is graduating from Central Public on May 19th. So you'll actually know where those things are. So that's really cool.
I'm sitting in the community of Central Louisiana, actually. So for those of you that don't know our geography, Denham Springs is about 5 miles to my east of my home. Zachary is 5 miles north, and my high school was about 2 miles north of where I am. Very close, lady. Nice to know that. It's always good to make those connections.
Yes.
Let's see. So Jennifer had posted to help make it easier to take the math test with a third-party proctor. Is there, or can one be added to GED.com, a simulator with a few practice problems for a scratch pad? The idea of using the mouse and computer screen to write problems while doing the test is intimidating to students. So Liz had posted a few links to the whiteboard, and I had done that too, to the whiteboard and to the simulator. And then Catherine Ellis said, I wish there was a testing taking strategies course. Read the question in chunks, slow down when you read the question so you understand it, glance at the units and numbers and the answers, check your time every once in a while. I feel like a lot of my students just don't know how to go about answering questions.
Right. And we are going to talk about some of that, because the most important problem we have, whether it's RLA, mathematics, read the entire question before you start thinking you've found the way to write the equation, the way the way you look and address, especially on the word problem. So you guys have some of the understandings that we're going to share. And I don't doubt that you do. Very often what I do in a lot of these PD sessions, number one, it validates that you know what you need to be doing and you're on the right track. And it also gives you the opportunity to look at how some other people do it. I'll go back to the practice, the simulation of a student answering some of those questions. How many of you, if you don't have a whiteboard that you actually use and make them work on, I tell everybody what I used to use is I called it the poor man's whiteboard. You get a sheet protector, you drop a copy of white plain paper in it, and you practice with them using that. You can always get a dry erase thing and erase your sheet protector, and that's a cheap thing you can use in the daily classroom. So all good advice and good comments. Thanks. We're going to roll on. Yeah, go ahead.
That's it for questions.
Yeah, they're very good questions. Thanks. I posted this. You will see I have the hyperlink to where you find our Tuesdays for Teachers webinar series. I hate it when I say, yeah, it's on the website along with 40,000 other pieces of information. So when you get a copy of this posted, you will have the hyperlink to get you right to it, even though you can navigate through the educator and administrator's website to find it, okay? But what I wanted to point out, all this stuff I'm talking with you about in very condensed form to do in about an hour and 15 minutes, we took 10 and a half hours of professional development from September to June of last year, doing these PD sessions with our content development experts. And you can see that you could either watch it, you can pull down all the resources, you can just get the PowerPoint. A lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too. If I've got access to the PowerPoint, I will scan through the PowerPoint until I see something I want to hear explained, and then I'll push the video to the point where I can just listen to the snippets I need to listen to. But we want you to know that everything I'm talking about today, you could find more detail in our Tuesdays for Teachers series listed under our webinars on the website. When I said what we won't be covering, we're going to talk about some, and I said this, we're going to talk about some of the more simple concepts. And we expect some of these items to be hard because the concepts are hard. And, we're not going to talk about permutations and quadratic equations. So I don't want to set expectations about digging into the hierarchy of the most difficult problems, right? But the first gap that was the most surprising to Michael Bell is our math content expert. It didn't matter on those first 5 questions. It didn't matter whether you came out with a low achieving, a high achieving, or somewhere in the middle. Everybody across the board had trouble with the pure computation. We think it might be just because of the over-reliance on calculators that even the kids who have good computational skills, they don't do it in their heads enough, to manage those 5 questions on the test. So keep in mind, make sure you have your students, I don't care how bright they are, have them do work sometimes without the use of a calculator. They have no idea what life was like before a calculator was in front of them. One of the reasons I'm not a medical technologist today is because I never learned how to use the slide rule, which was the best thing we had whenever I was in college. So, you give away your age and your access, but it's the same sort of thing. Make sure, because there's no reason that these students should have this much trouble on those first 5 or so questions on the non-calculator, the ones where we don't let them use a calculator. To help enforce that, on our website under math, you can pull down the indicator, the background on why we ask these questions and what it's required, and recommendations for test takers. Here's, if we're having trouble with that, and you can see Q1A, again, it's the indicator that is going to be tested, and here's some advice. So recommendations for how to approach that. I wanted you to know that that's available, and it's on the website, and I think I have it on your sheet that I provided with this. Let's talk about some of these. I'm trying to get this off of the top of my screen. so I can see this. All right, some of the other gap indicators, fiddles. On the non-calculator indicators, again, it's number sense. Look at the skills here. You've been working on these since day one. Ordering fractions or decimals, knowing how to convert one to the other so you can do a comparison to order them. Factors, multiples, exponents, distance. You can see the types of problems that they would see in these calculator prohibited items, and the things they're having trouble on. Then they're having trouble with arithmetic computation for basic orders, addition, subtractions, order of operations. Ooh, that's a big one, the order of operations. And then understanding and knowing how to manipulate squares, cubes, roots, undefined expressions. We find very often that they think they know a trick to it, but you know as well as I do, if they don't understand what the foundation behind the trick, when they see it in some other format, they're not going to be able to use it. They will be guessing incorrectly. I also put this in here, the laws of exponents, and here are other things they're having trouble with. In a 1 hour and 15-minute session, my apologies that I'm just making you aware of the things they're having trouble with and the types of problems, but I'm not going through and working through all of them, okay? You can see here that Michael did put some explanation in here. How do we help them manage, a -6 squared and the difference in a parentheses around the -6 to the 2nd power? They have trouble with these sorts of things. And they also, again, the order of operations. Here are other examples of things that they may see on the test. These are old items or, off the deck items. They're not going to see this stuff, but it's the kind of problems that address the type of indicator here in algebraic, reasoning, or quantitative. These are the types of things they are having difficulty with when we talk about it. And if these are the sort of problems, now you know what to go back and focus on. Related indicators. Well, I didn't put a lot of this in here because this was what this entire slide tells you is we give them the formulas for much of what they need to do. And if we ask the formula just as it is written, in other words, in the Pythagorean theorem, if we tell them a squared plus b squared equals c squared, that's great. If we give them a and b, they are going to be able to tell us what c is. They're not missing that, okay? But what they're missing is if we give them a and we give them c, they do not know how to manipulate the formula to tell us what b is, okay? And again, that goes back to, I have it memorized. You give it to me just this way, and I've got it. Let's play with manipulating the formulas a little bit on these. Also on the squares and square roots, they're mostly fine with this, but they struggle with squaring negatives. That's the information Michael wanted to share with educators, okay? We don't think about this, but three-dimensional shapes, the indicators, if we're talking three-dimensional shapes, we're talking about calculating surface area, volume, and determine dimensions, length, height, radius. You know what the biggest problem here is? They don't know the vocabulary. They don't understand the definitions of the terms. And again, I'm probably not saying anything that you don't already know, but it just reinforces how important it is that we do the work with definitions. They have to know the language in geometry. They have to know what's the definition of a prism. What does it look like? They've got to be able to identify it. I can put a square up there, and people who are working in math quite a bit could tell me 3 or 4 different names for that one shape. But a student will tell you it's a box or it's a square and nothing else. could turn it on its side and call it a diamond, but they don't see that. If you give them a diamond, they can't turn it around and show you the square. So there's a lot of visual understanding that needs to happen. And I think sometimes, and manipulatives, things that they can see, touch, and feel, whether it's 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, all of that will help them. And then they've got the formula. They just have to be able to figure out what measurement in this picture meets the definition of, radius, perimeter, diameter. They have trouble with the definitions. Another issue they have is probability. And you see, we put in compound probability. They do pretty well with simple probability. That's not too hard. But compound probability of sequential events or multiple categories, and I'm not saying they're going to see a lot of questions, but they don't know what to do with it if you've never spent a little time on it. He also lists in there compound probability with replacement or without replacement. All of that left me weak until he showed me, because again, I'm a PE teacher. But what I understood when he showed examples, and that's what I'm including in here in a little bit. When he gave us examples, a coin is flipped 3 times. What's the probability that the result is heads each time? Well, you've got, 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, or 1 in 6. But we have those answers for you in some of the materials that I'm sharing with you on here. In multiple categories, I got to tell you, and we do have the answers for you on this. And it does show on your website. When you open it up, you don't have to wait for me to scroll forward for it. The multiple categories, even I had to go back and think a little bit about. But if you're saying she's flipping a coin and rolls a standard die, what's the probability that the coin lands on heads and the die lands on 3? Well, I have a 1 in 2 chance on the coin and a 1 in 6 on the die. So it's 1 in 12. Or no, I'm sorry, did I get that wrong? No, he's got a different problem here. Yeah, it is 1 in 12 on the other. And if there's a math person in there and I'm messing this up, you just let me know. So some other probability basics that I think are really good at, if you've got a 6-sided die once, if you roll it once, you have a 1 in 6 or 1 out of 6 of getting it. And then you see some other types of probability. All the students understand rolling dice. So you've got issues there, but that's one of your easy examples for showing probability. Algebraic computation, the 4th gap that Michael identified. Things that, and when I say these are gaps, this is what they miss most often. Our missed and retired Vice President of Assessment, Martin Kay, you would drive him crazy if we would say, they want to know what's most missed. And he would hate to use that. So we talk about it in challenges. You can use whatever your words you want. It's what they're having trouble on. And if they're having trouble on it, they're missing it. So they're having trouble with the indicators in algebra. And you can see 1A, 1D, and 1F. Those indicators are related to linear expressions. They're having trouble with questions. And polynomials, even just the factoring. And the problem is the skills are weak in the foundational things, adding and subtracting, multiplying, dividing, multiple operations, and factoring. Again, things we've been working on since the 4th grade. You have to be able to do that to step up to the next level of doing what is needed to answer questions about the 3 things listed above. And here are examples of each of those. And he gives you the linear expressions, and so forth. These are things that, these are not out of the realm of what you would see on the test. And I want you to have these that you can use as examples if you need something to work with students and explain. Because when you start solving these, then you're going to back up and you're going to be talking about addition, subtraction, and the rules that apply. For some reason, they do fairly well on equalities. So you'll see that we didn't list equalities as a gap. They understand, that the equal sign means things on one side of the equation should be the same, come out to balance out with the other side. Equalities, they don't do well on this. It just throws them for a loop. A lot of it is understanding the language, the signs, and which way. So solving equations and inequalities algebraically. They don't have as much trouble with equations, but they do have a problem with inequalities. They do have, even though nearly all the concepts are the same, they do less well on these items. And, using algebraic reasoning to solve problems and writing equations and inequalities. Graphing inequalities is very different because we use a coordinate graph on equalities, but we use a number line on inequalities. You know what we figured out? They don't really know how to use a number line sometimes. And again, when I talk about the language that you're using on inequalities, understanding the language when they can write out a number line, but they don't. Here's the differences, and this may help you with your students. There are differences between the equations and the inequality, and they have to understand the meaning of inequality. How do you use it in writing and in reasoning? They need to know, again, the vocabulary, less than, more than, and then they need to be able to attach the symbol to the language, knowing when to switch directions on the inequality symbol, and graphing a one variable inequality. Let me see if I have a picture. Now, we're not going to dig into this, but obviously nobody is surprised to see that the sixth gap is slope and graphing. Now, if you've got students in there who work in the construction industry, let them teach your class about slope. They understand it. They can't build a roof without understanding it, And so sometimes you have students in your classroom who can help break it down. And I often found that sometimes letting students explain it would kind of open my mind to, hey, that's a different way. I never thought of saying it, but it made sense to him. So let's see if it makes sense to the other students. So these indicators calculate the slope from a table, a graph, or an equation. That is going to be something that may be on the test. Graphing a two-variable equation, or making sure you understand the unit rate as slope, or writing equations from points and or slope. I tell you, the time and energy I would spend so much may be weighed against the time and energy I would spend on some of these foundational things. And I want to go back and focus on graphing inequalities. When I talk about the language, if being able to understand, I found my point, let's say, when we solve some inequality and then they want us to graph it, do I darken in the entire circle? Do they know the language? Is the circle totally covered in? Is it a blank? Is it a circle with an open? Those are important things in the language of graphing. It's not that they don't know how to do a number line, but they don't know the language of how to put something on the number line. And I'm adding this in just so you know. In the mathematics portion of the test, Michael wrote in there, Michael wrote in there multiple correct answers. And so most of the items, just about every item on the test, especially in mathematical reasoning, it's multiple choice and they have only one correct answer. But the test also does have some technology enhanced items in math, such as fill in the blank, drag and drop, hotspot, and drop down. Like multiple choice items, most technology enhanced items have only one correct answer. However, a technology enhanced item might have more than one correct answer. In math, and he makes it very easy for you. in the mathematics portion of the test, if there is a multiple correct answer item, there's only going to be one. And when I talk about a multiple correct item, that could be when they show you 4 different pairs of coordinates and say, pick the coordinates, highlight all coordinates that could fit on the graphed line. So I want to make sure, don't get excited about multiple correct answers. If you have one at all in the math test, it would only be one. But you do need to tell the students, hey, this could occur, and it would be the only time you'd see it. And it's going to occur in something like giving you pairs of ordered things to plot on a line. So he was just making sure he covered all of his bases. And here's an example of it. Click on a pair of values that could be removed from the table so that the rest of the table would represent a function, or another example over there. So that's what a multiple correct answer would look like on the test. You all are more than aware that you have the formula sheets. You have the mathematic formula sheets and explanations. It is available in English and Spanish, and I do have the website for you over there if you need to print it out and put it in every student's workbook that they're carrying around. They should never have to look for it. And we like this formula sheet because it's concise. If you're using workbooks and materials and they're only talking about a particular formula for a particular segment, students are going to have to flip and flop through the book to go find them. So we like having that one clear, concise formula sheet with explanations. Wanted to make sure you had that. Also, when you're looking at other resources, you want to make sure that you use our math study guide. Students can access this very readily, and you can find it by going through your educator and administrator portion of GED.com. But these do give you samples and items that you can look for. Everybody's always looking for more ways to practice. And you can see down here at the bottom right of the screen, there's the exact link that will get you to the math study guide. So how do we close the skills gap? All right. I mean, it's like the old, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And you are practicing with your students. That is not the issue. So what we try to do, as Michael was giving us the things that they're having problems with, is say, okay, what else? What do we want to practice on? Because you only have so much information in whatever print or software material you're using. We only have so much information on our website, and we try to guide you through it as often as possible. But one of the great ahas, and I talked about this earlier when I said, let's use the assessment guide for educators. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you that whether it was math or science, social studies, or some other topic, I had to kind of chide myself. The assessment guide for educators was our Bible, and it really still is. But in 2012, 2013, we used it so we could help send teachers to the right resource to say, look, the test is changing. This is what's going to be tested, okay? And then we kind of got away from it. It's like everything else, just because I learned it, and I've been very comfortable to know it was there, but I hadn't really looked back at it for many years. And recently I looked back and thought, oh man, I am really not focusing. You and I both know that our cadre of adult learners, our adult educators, people come in and out of our programs, teachers, every year. And if we don't back up and remind everybody to go to the assessment guide for educators, shame on us. And that's what I've tried to start doing. They need to understand the math vocabulary, and they need to use available resources for new ideas. So let's talk about that. I showed you earlier in the assessment guide for educators for math, Appendix C. And that's where you can literally say, okay, this is what they're going to practice on the test. They also have a glossary of terms. I had not remembered the dictionary back there, the glossary of terms. that could be used on the test. Ladies and gentlemen, if the people who crafted and built this test took the time to give you an alphabetical glossary of terms on the mathematical reasoning test, I don't say everybody's going to have to define it, but I bet somewhere on some form of the test, some of these words need to be understood as they work through the problem. Same thing I tell science teachers, oh my goodness, I forgot, we would always say, well, you have to improve their reading and you have to improve their vocabulary. Susan Pittman and I have said that for years, but we were kind of silent as to what words and where do we go. And our assessment guide for educators had that for us, and we were forgetting to tell people to get there and to use it. In science, what's so important is we forget that we have a lot of students who dropped out of school before they ever got into a chemistry class. They don't know what a Bunsen burner is. They don't know a lot of just the basic terms and equipment that may be used or described on the test. And so in science, it's the same sort of thing. Make sure in science they're going through the appendix in the glossary of key terms for the science test. So right here, you have these guides right here for the mathematical reasoning test, important terms. And I've showed this 1,000 times, but it's still relevant. There's not a person you should send in to take a test who hasn't had all of the preparation possible to be the best they can be in a test taker experience. It's math. Make sure you've done the computer tutorial and the calculator tutorial. The computer tutorial, your students need to be comfortable doing a drag and drop, knowing what a hotspot is, knowing that they could change the font, knowing that without even asking permission, they could change the color screen on their computer. It is essential. They need to be armed with all of the best skills about test taking before they go in to take the test. Make sure they know how to find and use the calculator reference sheet, the formula sheet. You know how to use the math study guide, and work with them on those foundational calculator prohibited items. When we say we want them to do the computer and the calculator tutorial, we say that you send a student in to take the test. You want all of their cognitive ability to be on the test item that, number one, we hope they read the entire question before they start looking for answers. But we want their cognitive ability on answering the question, not figuring out how to find the information they need to answer the question, looking for the reference sheet, figuring out how to move the mouse. It's very important. Just like it's important that we work reading, it's important that we get them mechanically or operationally prepared for the test. And the way, I do the PD nationally. That's the privilege that gets me across the country with an opportunity to speak with all of you and ask questions and let you ask us questions. I showed you the Tuesdays for Teachers, how to access that. When we talk professional development, the big thing we do every year is our annual conference, and I'm putting this in here and the information because we would love to see you be able to come. Michael Bell, our content expert in math, is going to be there, as will all of our other content experts, doing sessions, repeating them at least twice so you have opportunities to look through. It's really important. That's our watershed of PD. Now let's talk about some of the other resources that would be important. Moved my cursor off and it doesn't want to move nicely. Free resources. I know you know about all of our things that we have in partnership with Aztec and some of our other publishing partners, but I also don't want you to feel like we're just promoting things, wonderful partnerships we have, but we also want to bring you free resources. So if you don't have time to look around, this is what this next section is about. We're going to talk about free resources because everybody says we need more stuff to practice on, but I can't find it. here's some things you might look at. All right. So the Florida Department of Education years ago with the 2014 test did a wonderful website. And I would say go to the Florida Literacy Math app. We have all of these things. I'm going to show you how to find them. All right. I listed them in bullets, and let's look at a screen. I just talked about this is obviously something that we are in partnership with our friends at Aztec, because they stepped up to the plate when we heard our teachers saying we need more practice. We don't have enough stuff out there. We worked with them. Basically, GED Flash is almost like a digital flashcard across all content areas, but it's something some of you may or may not be familiar with. But you know, it was a lot of fun for us to work with them. Really, we helped as content experts, kind of looking at the test items that they had on those flashcards. And the nice thing about this is we would never put our name being attached to it had we not done research and efficacy. And we know that steady users of this particular product can change their math scores 3 to 4 points. And for you students who are wavering right over the line, 3 or 4 points is very often enough to get them over the finish line. So one of our products, here is the Florida Literacy Math application. And you can see the website is right down there. They have everything you need from start to finish, in practice, in videos for the students to watch. It's a great guide, and something, because it's very mobile, obviously it's an app, so it's phone friendly, something your students may enjoy working and using. Okay. I would ask you, oh, and the nice thing about it is for you teachers, there are tracking sheets with this Florida Math app, so it's something that you can use in the classroom. They can work off independently, and you've got a tracking sheet for it, and you can see this. I would say go take a look at it if you have any interest in it. Again, we don't have a dog in any of these hunts. These are just free resources that my colleague Susan Pittman, who is a contractor or consultant for us with the testing service, this is what she does. We have other things. Melissa and I don't get to spend our days surfing the website, seeing what teacher has put something out that's new, but Susan does that for us, and she brings back these resources that we think are worthwhile and can share with you. Effortless Math. This is a great one, and some of you may already be aware of this. And Melissa or Dawn, you can look and see if anybody puts a little note in there. Susan really likes this one because of the very different levels and the ease of the worksheets and the ability for teachers to work with students on these worksheets with answer keys so that they can self-check. And it's got, of course, the effortless Math promotes it as both TABE, which is one of the assessments that's used nationally, and GED skills practice. And we find it very helpful. IXL Learning. This is content not just for math, but for RLA, for science, and for social studies. But it is a personalized learning system that students can have a lot of mobility in. One of the reasons that she liked that. Now, many of you probably know the GED Math Crash Course that is designed by one of your own. The website, I got the hyperlink listed there. That's Light and Salt Learning, moved up into a different course name, and that is an educator out in the state of Arizona. She has done a lot of really, really helpful things, and it started out pretty much just in math. And I see I'm on our Facebook group page, and she interjects information all the time for students there. So I think you would find a lot of very helpful things there. Different ways that somebody else may be approaching the same skill that you've been teaching the same way for quite some time. That's what this is all about. Math is fun. This one I would bet you know about because it's been around for a while, but the way it breaks things down into each of the different units is really, really helpful. Math is fun. We get a lot of comments. Anytime I show this, there are a lot of teachers who are already aware of this. So I hope that's the case in Michigan. And if it's not, we're happy to share more with you. way back in the time capsule when Susan and Bonnie and I first started, this was one of our favorite things because in geometry, the biggest problem is if you don't start with visual understanding of the shapes and being able to use the language and talk about shapes in multiple terms, it's very hard to get them to any type of analysis. It's understanding the language, visually understanding it, then being able to kind of see it in your mind's eye. It's the old thing of, concrete, and then we move it to abstract, but you've got to start with concrete. This, we used to use this in our workshops. We would do this printout. It's helping you, students, if they can't see it three-dimensionally, break it down into 2 dimensions, and nets will help you do that. They may not be able to find the surface area of a rectangle, but this will show you how to break that apart on a piece of graph paper, and they can do, once they can see it in a 2 dimension, they can do it. So sometimes helping with math interactives and using nets and so forth are very, very helpful. Yay. For once, I actually finished just as I was hoping, so we can open up the mic and do some Q&A. Let me see what I put beyond here.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so somebody had asked, said, my understanding is IXL costs money. Do I have that wrong, or is there a way around it?
I am not sure if IXL costs money. I know years ago when it was first getting started, I did not think it cost money. And I will go back and check that because sometimes, just like Muse ELA, it's and the Annenberg Learner, and those are all things that have great math components. Well, Muse ELA is more in the RLA term, but the Annenberg Learner, there are segments that are free, and if you want some of the additional services, there's a fee. But thanks for saying that. I'll go back and double check that. Okay.
Lots of great suggestions and tips. I'm going to read some of the questions for you, though. One random comment: I hear students say frequently that the GD math final test is more difficult than the math ready test. Just an observation. Anybody hear students say this too?
I can give you an answer that Marty Kay gave me about why. Here is what may have happened for students, because I can tell you that all 3 forms of the tests, the same concepts are tested on all 3 forms. They may be tested in different type of technology enhanced items, things like that. Here's the other thing. Look at all of the items that could possibly be on the test, okay? And we know, I gave you kind of the percentages of the 4 sub-reporting categories, but in those 4 sub-reporting categories, every single item on there is not going to show up on every test, nor can it show up on the GED Ready. What happens very often, because we did look at this about a year or so ago with Marty, because we were hearing that too. We had people thinking, why was it harder? Well, you know what? I would bet that between the ready test, the concepts on that half-length practice test, there's no way that all of those concepts are going to make it on the half-length practice test that they will see on the full test. We think the disconnect in a student's mind is because the concepts that could be packed into a half-length test is far fewer than what they're going to see on the entire test. I don't know if that I hope that explains it in the best way I could come up with it. I hope that helps a little bit. But there's not been a change. They're not harder. It's simply, and here's the other thing. We obviously can't put as much in the half test as we can in the whole test. And what if that student happened to luck up and see a lot of concepts he was really good at in that half-length practice test, and in the whole test, the broader section brought to light some of the sections he was not that comfortable with. So that's the best answer I have for you, but I assure you one is not intentionally or by design harder than the other.
Okay. Mike said, anyone that doesn't feel comfortable teaching math should have a playlist of YouTube videos for students to watch. watch as a group and discuss, watch individually, etc. Have them ready for that student that struggles in a particular area. Mike also said that he strongly recommends mel.org for GED practice questions. He said that learner mode is most helpful. Mel.org is Michigan Electronic Library. And he said that they have hundreds of flashcards for GED subject, and that's also free. Jen made the comment, my students are working so hard, but they're coming in with such low skills, struggling with place values, rounding, etc. It's a very slow process for us to get from there to passing for many of them.
You are, I mean, it is not uncommon. And what we have to say is, and they are coming to you, I would assume you have, I'm not sure your setup, but you have you have adult basic education, and obviously that's where those students are. They're a long way from saying they are GED candidates, because you're starting with them in adult basic education. They've got to get those foundational skills before you can consider them adult secondary. But if you're like I was, I didn't have the luxury of having a two-pronged classroom. I, like you, just understood some of these people are going to be here for a long time, because I've got so much I've got to teach them to say they're ready for these higher skills for the GED. We feel your pain, but that's just the story of our adult learners. I wish it were different.
Jay just said, just checked, and you can access some of the IXIL math, etc. for free.
Yay! Okay, I'm glad
So that's good.
and misrepresenting it. So
right, is the educator assessment guide available in Spanish as well? It is, right, Debbie?
Yes.
Has the test gotten harder recently? It seems like we have more students with decent practice scores failing the real test. It seems like it wasn't like that before.
This is a universal question, and it has bubbled up for us in the last year. And we can assure you the test has not gotten harder. Okay. Now, when you say the test has not gotten harder, it hasn't. I mean, the same concepts, the same percentages of concepts in each of the areas are tested. Here's what I've found with some teachers and local programs who have literally said, I swear this is getting harder. I ask, you get a score report, and I know you all look at the student's score report. What I have found is we are not using the score report to the best of our ability to guide instruction, because, and I'll give you an example, and this is not an example I heard in Michigan, okay? One of my examples, I had somebody who told me that, I need some help here. I have a student who has taken the science test and failed it 6 times. And I thought, oh my God, how would you let that happen to begin with? But, I said, okay. He said he's always scoring at 142 to 144, 141 to 143 in these things. And I said, you got to just stop and reset. I can tell you the test has not gotten harder, but the only thing I would ask to do when a student has failed a test one time, the score report is valuable because you can see where they need to help, and you can work there. Even more valuable is if they have taken a ready test and a test. Now you got 2 documents. You need to fold those score reports over, put them side by side, and start circling off what is happening to students, because on this person, I had literally 3 different score reports that I could look at, and it was a no-brainer. When I flipped the page over, I circled the same 4 concepts every time he was missing it. I go back and I work on those 4 concepts, and those 4 concepts alone will get him across. Okay. If we're not using the score reports to the best of our ability, that's one thing. But the idea that the test is getting harder, if they are scoring, the only thing we can lead to, and you already know this, what we tell people is, we don't know what was going through a student's mind the day they showed up for the test. they obviously feel, even though the GED Ready is a timed test, it is only half the length, and they don't feel the pressure or the timing. That has a lot to do with it. The only answer we have for those that you can't see through other issues are test anxiety issues, or, as I said earlier, concepts that show up on this test that may not have been as heavily asked in another test on the Ready test, that they don't do well there, but they did well on the GED Ready. It's the only explanation we have, other than I can assure you, nothing has happened to make the test harder.
Any additional math questions in the few minutes that we have? I know there's some questions coming in about the RLA test, but
it's okay.
Yeah, if there aren't any, I'll read the RLA.
We're sort of at the point where I always say you should never walk into this session and walk away with a question we didn't answer, and I don't care what realm it comes from.
Many students are better off skipping the essay. I just need to backtrack here. I think somebody.
It's the RLA and the students getting a 0, and the fact that they can pass the test without the practice of writing. And I will give you 2 examples of why they are not better off if they skip the writing portion of the test. You're going to have a student sitting silent for 45 minutes in a 150-minute test. That makes no sense. And very often when somebody tells me they're telling somebody to skip the writing, that tells me they're skipping teaching the writing skills. And the only reason a student is going to do well on the multiple choice technology enhanced items on the test is because they've been taught those very same skills as you have practiced the writing portion of the test with them. To rotely give them the grammar and the homonyms and all of those things, to rotely teach that thinking you're going to get them ready for the multiple choice is not the best practice. People learn by doing, and doing is writing, and writing improves the reading, and the reading improves the writing. Mantra. So two points to make to you there. The fact, and I did a whole thing, and you can look at it on YouTube. We know people are irritated at getting a 0, and I'm irritated at it too. I'm an educator. It doesn't mean they didn't write, but they didn't hit the same watershed that we used to not give them when they made 1s and 2s on the other test, if you remember the 2002. Neither here nor there. I would urge you not to cut your students short from practicing and working on writing, because you are eliminating their opportunity in the job market. Do you think that when an employer puts a little bottom line and says, why do you want this job? They don't give a rat's behind about what they actually put as an answer. They're looking to see, can this person put words together in a coherent, well-written sentence? Because if I've got 2 job applicants and they both look the same on paper, I'm going to look at how do they write. And if they can't put a sentence together, I've got a problem. I'm going to give the job to the person who can write. That's real life, for why we make them write. I am so sorry. And at this point, I think some others in assessment may be sorry that the way we extrapolated that, because I guarantee you, if they were getting 1s, nobody would be that upset. But it is the 0. And I wish I could change it, but I can't. But I can tell you, the only way students are past part of this is in those skills, in the actual writing. I want to be very respectful of your time, and I know you have somewhere else to go. You see our emails here. If you have any other questions that we did not answer, please write. Love to have a conversation, whether by email or phone call, with any of you about things that bother you. I mean, it's our job to hear and to change what we can. Melissa?
Yes, I would say the same thing. So if you have any questions, I know there's some questions that aren't answered here. Questions, like to reach out with, comments, please don't hesitate. That's what we're here for. So we look forward to your emails. And like Debbie said, whether it's conversing through email or on the phone, happy to do it, want to do it. So thank you for attending our session today. And thank you, Dawn, for being our moderator.
thank you
Thanks very
both
much.
for all of your information. It was really useful. So thank you. All of their materials will be sent and the video presentation will be posted too. So please, again, thank you for your time, Melissa and Debbie. And for those of you that are still on, we would love to see you at the 2:30 chat with oh gosh, Latoya, I've forgotten her last name. We sent the link out, so please join us at 2:30 for that. Thank you, everyone.